There is liberalism in many of us, and many see this as harmless or even good, but it is insidious. It tears at our core instincts, and leads us to destruction. We must tear this away from ourselves if we wish our civilization to survive. Our liberal paradigm seems harmless, but it eats away at the very core of our lives. Like some poisons absorbed in low doses, slowly we build up a certain immunity to its harmful effects, at least in our perception. But our perception is poisoned. We are not living normal lives when compared to our ancestors, those who survived in order to bring us into being. We accept unacceptable things often without thinking it through, or only shallowly. We then observe the overall results and cannot fathom why society has gone so wrong. We witness a myriad of ills, we see policy with no productive purpose, we see a failing education system, we see rampant vice and degeneration, yet we look at the state of the system and think, how could it be so broken? By we, I do not necessarily mean us, or even myself, but rather the collective societal we, the one which should reflect the greater whole of our nation should it be possible for it to experience cognition as if it were a conscious organism in and of itself. Perhaps that is the problem, and perhaps the corpus callosum of our civilization is what is broken, for surely our right eye watches in awe while the left eye wonders what the hell happened. For example, even the most liberal of people would choose a female babysitter over a male, and most would actively avoid hiring a homosexual of any stripe for such a job, and trans would be right off the table. Should they not, their instinct has been annihilated. For what better measure can one have of instinct than their willingness to risk their offspring's health and survival? What better measure of evolutionary fitness can one have but their timidity in the face of expulsion from the gene pool? We may even laugh at the ridiculous things some people do, but what within ourselves is equally laughable? There come many issues that a libertarian type might hold tightly to, like homosexuality being about consent and tolerance. But what is tolerance but piecemeal timidity in the face of annihilation? Should homosexuals wish to engage in their behavior, in a private setting and without anyone else knowing, what would it matter? It really does not. But should it be legal, if that fact alone leads to it becoming public knowledge which corrupts the social order into oblivion? Then it must be made illegal. Perhaps it goes too far to enforce that legal status too much, perhaps the over-enforcement is the real problem, for it forces a grievance, but should it not be stopped and stayed from public view, if the alternative is a collapse into widespread degeneration? Who gains from openly public homosexuality exactly? Cui bono? Anyone with a brain sees that the contemporary exposure of the trans lifestyle flowed directly from the opening up to Gatum into the public sphere. Slippery slope aside, the growth of acceptance and tolerance is not simply people becoming more enlightened, for all the data says the opposite. Attention spans are drastically down. IQ scores are down 1.5 points per decade on average since the 1870s. People are more attracted to shiny lights and pornography than they are books or relationships. Millions of young men willingly give their money to women on the internet for what? A snowflake's chance in hell to attract her? These young men know hardly anything about attraction. They are effeminate, weak, soy-sodden and juvenile. No. This acceptance and tolerance is the classic sign of a dying civilization. Welcome to the disenlightenment. Tolerance should extend to what is not destructive and no further. That should be the limit of our patience. Do not be fooled or cajoled otherwise. The lives of your descendants and their civilization depends on it. Millions of people across eons, who by your failures to recognize the dangers, doom them. What difference is it from suicide? None. It is an infinite holocaust of the multitudes within you. Is it kindness to encourage failure or weakness? It is destructive and evil. Yet liberalism promotes this behavior. Should you feed a drug addict drugs or money for him to get drugs? What if he dies as a result, in order to cure his pain? You didn't mean to though. It just happened. Well, nothing just happens. If you played a role in their death through procurement of that which killed him, how could you not feel guilty? That guilt is the acknowledgement that you did wrong, that your failure in virtue killed someone. We see it in our lives today. Our nations lurch from crisis to crisis, and with each we learn nothing because we must always lurch. Never can we be allowed to ponder, for that would lead to reflection and then we would have to deny our own part in it. Denial is constructed outside of our view, and so when this insidious force finally amasses a real problem, the first thing a liberal must do is deny it exists. For how could it? Problem X is far more prevalent. Focus on that. We find this sort of thing prominently in the alleged anti-woke sphere, in characters like Karlin Borozenko, James Lindsay, Eric Weinstein, Elon Musk, to some degree as well Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein, though I say they are a slightly different category. Jordan and Brett do not march in lockstep to the liberal paradigm, and sometimes their nascent instincts keep them grounded in reality, but they do falter and fall into the subverted liberal default on certain subject matter. Peterson especially should know better, or perhaps he does but is not willing to risk saying it. There is a certain disdain I have for that, as I think Peterson could take those extra steps he even preaches in his lectures as a necessary component of the maintenance of civilization. At the same time, he is doing a lot of work standing between even more subversive degenerate rhetoric and the soft, flailing masses of normies, and so I fear his piece being removed from the board resulting in something far worse, like brainwashed normie progressive death squads seeking out the ideologically impure at the barrel of a gun and the zeal backed by powerful weapons and perceived righteousness. Should we lose his piece we would first need to be prepared for total war, but perhaps I'm just pessimistic. The promised program of peace and tolerance has not been achieved. Instead we have only had continuous ideological war for over a decade. They are coming hard for your children now. What will you do? Will you tolerate it? Or will you have the moral backbone to shove degeneracy back into the closet whenceforth it came?